So one of the things we heard about was sort of, memorizing the questions and sort of versus learning the concepts. Um, let's say, I think Michael, I'll start with you on this one. Talk to me about, your experience through studying and going through the whole tests and sort of the difference around learning the concepts versus memorizing the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seemed to be that the entire exam is sort of organized around learning the concepts. I mean, it's so much material, and I maybe this was communicated in the lectures, but it's kind of we're going to deal with all these crazy problems in our careers, and it's about being able to know enough to figure it out and apply it across the field. So um, it it was definitely about learning the concepts and um, going through those exams. I was able to figure out which concepts I wasn't getting, and then
Mhm.
really, you know, dive in and do more research on them so that I could figure it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tyler, what are your thoughts on sort of the difference between these two things and what's more important?
Well, yeah, and I agree. I mean, the general idea of what they're doing here is they want to know that you have a general understanding of the key concepts. And spending too much time on any particular one piece of subject matter is just detrimental because you may find that you only get one question or zero questions on that because it's also somewhat random what version of the test you're going to get and what percentage of each one of those uh, concepts they're actually going to give you questions on. So, for example, probably the best piece of advice I could give you about this is a situation that I ran into that the first time I took PPD, I failed it. And when I took it the first time, there was this particular type of structural question that I saw probably 8 times, and it used a diagram that I'd never seen before. So throughout all these questions, it was key to be able to understand what this diagram was in order to give it the right answer. And I just, for whatever reason, had never seen this diagram, didn't know anything about it. So when I went and studied the second time around for the exam, I spent a lot of time researching, understanding, and getting the concepts behind these particular structural diagrams that I saw. But when I went in the second time and took the test, I didn't see a single question that had that same diagram. So here I was thinking that this particular exam is really high on this particular structural subject that uses this very specific diagram the first time around, but the second time around, it was nowhere even near the same, the amount of questions on that particular subject. So I think if you try to focus too much on the specifics of the subject matter, it may just be lucky or unlucky that that's even covered on your exam that you get. So
Hmm.
it's just more try to just focus on generally do I understand the concepts that they're going at because it's just impossible to know how much you're going to see that specific subject.
Yeah, that's funny. It's making me remember Jared, who runs the exam at NCARB. He sort of stresses like the exam's just testing for minimum competency. It's not testing for like expert or super advanced knowledge. Of course, we've always joked here at Black Spectacles that we were going to make T-shirts that we would pass out to people who passed all the tests, and the T-shirts would just say minimally competent, which we thought would be really funny. But in any case, I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that, exactly that um, I don't know. I guess there's a little bit of a danger there. I suppose that's sort of what we're getting toward here is that there's a little bit of danger when you study around, getting into the weeds too deeply and just remembering that it is a higher level test around the basic concepts. And right here, by the way, we say instead of memorizing the questions, I think we probably mean memorizing the facts. And I think that's one of the keys when they've described, how they organize this exam. Maybe in ARE 4.0 and even earlier, it was a little bit more of a memorization type of exam where it was a good idea to kind of memorize the key facts, how many, whatever it is, how many square feet in an acre, blah, 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 little factoids like that. Whereas this is much more about applying sort of that knowledge at a higher level, at a more conceptual level. Um, in most of the, I think that's kind of like the lowest level of complexity that the test questions have. Um, which is a little bit different with ARE 5.0 than other exams. Kelly, do you have any other comments here about this sort of difference between the two?
I do, and it's about kind of getting lost in the weeds of the specifics. But I often just thought back, I'm like, all right, well, what's the purpose that NCARB or like what are they driving at? And a lot of times, I think it's you're not expected to know everything about everything, but you're expected to make reasonable judgment calls in the design of these buildings and coordinate with the people who know a lot more than you in some of these fields, right? So, it wasn't when I was studying for the structural components, I'm like, well, what would it take to, have reasonable conversations with my structural engineers about, this, that, or the other, and get the feedback that I need to make certain calls on things. And so if you can get to a point where, like, yeah, I think I'd be prepared to have reasonable discussions with, these members of my project team, then that's usually pretty good for ARE 5.0, because they're going to be asking you a lot of those things, like what would you do in this situation? And from what I hear, I never tested under 4.0, that it was sort of a little bit different how they put those they formulated those questions. So when I got lost in the weeds, and everybody will, you kind of get into one specific area or the other, and be like, oh, I'm learning about acoustics, and you trail off, or I'm learning about, electrical systems, and you trail off. And I, particularly when you're trying to manage your own time, just being like, okay, what's enough to understand the concepts and be able to communicate clearly in these areas. And then if you can get that far and feel pretty confident, then it's probably time to schedule the test,
Yeah, that's a really good metric in a way to figure out if you know enough is, can you have reasonably competent discussions? I was just thinking, in which you're not embarrassed to be having conversations with those architects or consultants. Then you're probably knowledgeable enough about this particular topic. That's a good tip. I like that a lot.